All right, well, thank you. We are now ready for an update from the Kansas Sentencing Commission, and we'll invite Mr. Scott Schultz, Executive Director of the Kansas Sentencing Commission, to the podium. Please introduce yourself and welcome to committee.
Madam Chair, good morning. Members of the committee, my name is Scott Schultz. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas Sentencing Commission. We are a 17-member commission that is part of the executive branch that actually assists with policy for you and for the state as far as criminal justice is concerned. I kind of like I have a lot of slides in the presentation, as you'll note from the handouts that you have, but I'm not going to go over all of those. But I just wanted you to have that information for you. I know there's quite a few new members that may not be spending a lot of time in this particular field of work, and so we're going to kind of get a little bit into the weeds, but I want to be able to inform you as to certainly what the commission does and how it can help you. And what you're going to see from us, starting with the hearings that are coming up fairly soon. So our agenda is going to be pretty broad, but we do our value that we bring to you as well as other stakeholders is data. That is, we actually are the state statistical analysis center for the state when it comes to criminal justice. If Arby's has the meats, we have the data. So if you can just remember that, we get KBI data, we get KDOC data, and then we actually have our own data that we utilize to be able to provide information to you. So with that, I'm going to jump in. We have, again, the 17 members. We have 4 legislators that are actually on. Senator Haley is currently serving, actually the longest serving member of the Sentencing Commission at this point, and certainly appreciate his participation and input over the years. But we have 2 House members, 2 Senate. The Secretary of Corrections is involved, as well as AG's office. We have 2 judges, district court judges that are chair and vice chair, an appellate court judge, Judge Hill, and then we have probation represented from community corrections and court services. We also have a lot of other attorneys from the defense bar as well as prosecutors, and then have a couple public members. So with that, we have a pretty broad cross-section of criminal justice, and we're able to actually vet a lot of things before we bring that to you. So just keep that in mind during the time. Some of our other duties and responsibilities, we are actually a freestanding agency. I have 15 FTEs in our office, so we're a fairly small office, but at the same time, we are research-driven, and in doing so, that allows us to do quite a few things in terms of specifically during this time of the year. We give you legislative bed space impacts, and that's what I'm going to talk about here in a little bit in depth as to you're going to get those. What do they look like? Why should you care? So we're going to talk about that in just a little bit. We also do prison bed space projections for the Department of Corrections, which also are important for you, since hypothetically, I believe the Secretary has asked for about $500 million from the legislature. So that might be important in looking at these prison projections that we're going to go over in just a little bit. We also have another program called the Senate Bill 123 Substance Abuse Treatment Program. This is a program that's been in existence since 2003. We administer about $10 to $12 million every year to substance abuse treatment providers in your communities. We certify them, and then the courts actually order these offenders that are convicted of possession, small sales, sometimes lower-level non-drug felonies into the 123 program. That places them on probation in your communities, and then they actually get state-paid substance abuse treatment. What we see is over half of the individuals, that's included even in the incarcerated population, have some sort of substance abuse or mental health issues. In some cases, they have both or co-occurring conditions. So this program specifically focuses on those individuals that meet those criteria, and then we actually spend about around $4,200 every year for each of these offenders to pay those treatment providers for services. Now we pay, and I'll get into this in a little bit, but we pay for inpatient treatment all the way down to your outpatient group type of treatment. And so we set cost caps for that. We're almost like a mini insurance company, but we are responsible for administering that program. We also have a desk reference manual that goes out to all legal practitioners that are practicing on the criminal law side. This is what I'm holding in my hands to give you an idea of what that is. This is the desk reference manual. We update it every year based upon what you do here and the legislature passes. Also, if there's any appellate decisions that change things, we're actually going to be changing that for folks to be able to look at. This is also available online for more tech-savvy legal practitioners as well. One of the things that we also do is, because we have so much data, we do a lot of private research requests depending on the season. That comes in from academia, from East Coast, West Coast, Ivy League, you name it. They're actually wanting our data because it is good. And you'll see, as far as our projections are concerned in a little bit, the data is very good, which makes the projections very good as well. One of the things in the last several years I've tried to expand our reach as far as educational outreach. We have several attorneys on staff that provide continuing legal education, but also educate probation officers to sentencing practice and updates in the legislative updates and those type of things. And so we have, those are ongoing throughout the year, and several hundred practitioners are actually served as a result of that. I also have a staff attorney. You had Todd Thompson here, I believe, yesterday. One of his deputies actually works part-time for us and is a staff attorney, and we actually have a Q&A helpline for any practitioners, probation, attorneys, judges, to email, call, so that we can help them out with sentencing issues. So very grateful for the opportunity to be able to help them be better so that the system can actually be better. What I will continue to say to you during this presentation is, if you have questions about any of this after we're done, unfortunately it's going to be a drink from the fire hose situation, unfortunately, this morning. So if you have questions after this, please come to me or email me. I am always available. During the legislative process, if you're looking at a bill you want to introduce and you want to see what kind of a bed impact there might be for prison beds, please contact me. Will be happy to run that as a preview to allow you to get some understanding of what that impact may be as far as the estimate. Just a quick history. The commission is fairly new. It was created in 1989 when there were some prison overcrowding issues and the lawsuit had been filed. At that particular time, the court order had actually required 100 inmates to be released every single month. And so the state mobilized and said, what can we do to make sure that this doesn't happen again? And so the Sentencing Commission was actually created. Over the next couple of years, up until 1993, they did get a plan together, presented it to the legislature, and in 1993, the Sentencing Guidelines Act was actually passed. Now, you have a handout that I've given to you. From that, this is a laminate that has 2 grids on it, front and back. And this is actually, if you're not actually reading it, it even makes a great placemat that you could put coffee on or whatever else. But this actually goes on most council tables in most courtrooms and on the benches of most jurisdictions in the entire state. But the commission is required to actually maintain the grids. And I'd like to be able to take a little bit of time to go over this with you. What I would recommend after this is my 14th session, what I would recommend to you is that you bring this with you when you come to this committee. At any time, you are probably going to be seeing bills that actually increase penalties, this actually gives you an idea anyway of what that potentially could be. And so it's a great resource tool to be able to look at. And if there's questions about it, it's easy to refer to. So, so to kind of give you an idea, on here I've actually circled two different axes. So for example, the x-axis in red on here is A through I. Criminals or defendants are actually sentenced based upon the severity of the offense and their criminal history. And so all things being equal, if Natalie and I were actually convicted of the same offense, but I had greater criminal history than she did, I'm going to be punished more severely. Even though we may have even been at the same, we were co-conspirators, committed the crime together, and were charged with the same thing. Because I have a greater criminal history, the law basically indicates that I'm going to serve more potential time. So, so what you see on the top there on the x-axis is criminal history, A through I, and so it actually goes from right to left instead of left to right in terms of criminal history of misdemeanors or no records would be an I, all the way up to an individual that has person felonies, which is 3 or more of those would be an A category. Now, all these numbers in here, for your reference, are months. So just consider, so for example, somebody there on an I with that's severity level 1, that would be 147 to 165 months would be their presumptive sentence. So these are for felonies only. Our office only handles felonies. There are a plethora of misdemeanors that are done in the district courts. We don't handle that as far as that data. What you're going to be seeing is only, the grids are only for felonies as well. So just keep that in mind. In distinguishing a misdemeanor from a felony, misdemeanors actually are punishments that can actually occur up to a year in the county jail. So if that is helpful to remember, anything else above that would be classified as a felony. Also, the line of demarcation between misdemeanors and felonies are that felonies are actually, almost all of them with the exception of a few, are served in state prison. You can't serve there's a couple instances where you serve a felony in jail, but most of those are going to be all served in our state facilities. Anytime you hear a misdemeanor, you're serving those in your county jails. So kind of, it's basic, but at the same time, hopefully helpful for you to remember where those individuals would be going if they actually are convicted. So on your y-axis, then you've got Roman numerals 1 through 10. 1 is the most severe offense. 10 is the least severe offense. You also see that there's a legend down here that has different colors. Green, for example, is if you fall into those boxes that are green, that is automatic presumptive probation. So if you would be in a 7I, for example, where you're looking at 11 to 13 months, that is a presumptive probation range. So unless something outside of that would happen, which can, there are departures available that the court can use if there's atypical cases. You're looking at presumptive probation. The blue boxes here are what are called presumptive imprisonment boxes or border boxes. If you fall in these boxes, the judge can actually go either way in terms of, depending on the circumstances, to place you in prison or give you probation. And then all the rest of the white that you see in this grid is presumptive prison. So if you're falling in that, that is the starting point. On the back is the drug grid. And this was created again in 1993. There were 2 grids. At that time, if you recall, that we had a war on drugs that was going on. Nancy Reagan was telling us, just say no. And so the legislature decided to make a separate drug grid. It reads similar, but it's helpful to remember on this. Obviously, it's an abbreviated grid in terms of severity level. Anytime you would have a possession of drugs, those are level 5s. So those are severity level 5s, and those are the lowest. And The 1 through 4 involves some level of distribution, sale, or manufacture of drugs. So pretty easy to remember on that side of where you're looking at in terms of distribution versus mere possession. What I wanted to illustrate here is that the red box that I have up on the screen and the slide, this gives you a table as to our drug grid is quantity-based. We switched over in 2012 to a quantity-based system. So, for example, I have a, just to give you an idea, level 4, we have, I am caught with meth, 1 gram. It's about the weight of this paperclip. That would be a level 4, a level 4 felony. So depending on the circumstances, law enforcement actually weighs that. They send it off for testing, those type of things, and that establishes actually the severity levels. There are also thresholds as to how much you can have that will actually allow you then to be presumed that you're actually distributing or selling. But that kind of gives you an idea of as far as what it takes to actually make it to those levels, as far as those thresholds. It also gives you on both sides an idea of what the terms are for probation. And in most cases, it's either 12 months, 24 months, or 36 months. There are certain instances where you might be able to do 60 months, or the court can order that, but generally it's somewhere between 12 and 36 months. Now, an individual that actually goes to prison, they do not just get out once they finish their term. They will actually be sentenced to a term of post-release. So it's kind of like probation on the backside, except they're being supervised by parole. And so depending on the severity of the crime, they will be supervised for a period of time. Some will be on post-release supervision for 18 months, 12 months. Others, anywhere from up to actually life on parole, depending on the severity of the offense. So, all of the timing that actually occurs on that, of course, at some point it gets a little bit confusing, but know that individuals are actually being supervised throughout the process, whether they're on probation and they don't go to prison, or whether they've actually done incarceration time, they still are going to be doing post-release supervision. So the question sometimes comes up, what's the point of this? Why do we have, prior to this, we had an indeterminate sentencing scheme that allowed for, if I was convicted of a burglary, I could get 5 to 15 years, or some crimes were 15 to life. Many times those individuals actually would serve barely half of that. And so having a determinate sentencing scheme does what I have on this slide. It establishes equity among offenders. Part of the problem with or a couple problems with the system at the time that the guidelines were passed was there was disparity in sentencing. Folks that were out in rural areas were sentenced differently than they were in urban areas, for example. Some of the times, based upon geography, that would happen. I can remember back as a young prosecutor, we would have a stack of burglaries in Shawnee County on Thursdays that we would go through on our docket. I practiced out in western Kansas for a number of years, and they may have 1 burglary a month, or even less than that. And so those burglaries took on more of a more meaning to possibly the court than it would be as a rote process in Shawnee County, for example. So, so the guidelines then now actually, if you're only looking at the severity and the criminal history of the individual, it sets things up to actually equalize that process in terms of no matter where you're at, whether you're in Gove or whether you're in Johnson County. So there was race disparities as well, and that was one of the things that it was trying to solve as well. It allows for sentencing in those particular situations. It allows equity for sentencing. I mentioned the departures real quick. If there are situations where there are things outside of the norm of this particular crime, it allows for the court to actually depart. And so, so that's an important distinction, that there is still a discretion that the court has to actually go beyond the grid to be able to sentence an individual for a particularly heinous crime, for example. Or if there are mitigating factors, they can also depart downward. For our purposes at the Sentencing Commission, that last point is it allows for more certainty in predicting prison populations. And it certainly does. Because it allows us to actually utilize averages and those type of things that we wouldn't otherwise have in an indeterminate sentencing scheme. One of the things I wanted to touch on for just a little bit, the commission is required to we have 3 forms that we maintain for all the practitioners: the pre-sentence investigation report, the journal entry of sentencing, and then the probation violation journal entry. We have recently launched an application called the KSAP, or the Kansas Sentencing Application, that practitioners can actually use. We have over 1,200 since the soft launch in October, and over 700 cases actually have been filed within that. And it allows electronic filing of the journal entries that wasn't done before. It was done in hard copy. So we're very excited about that, and that continues to evolve. Now, the legislative bed space impact is something that I'm going to just spend a little bit of time on. What that actually looks like is that portion over there on the left-hand side. Is it possible to zoom in on that? But this is what you're going to be getting from us. It'll be on Sentencing Commission letterhead. The main takeaway points here are we're looking at what a bill potentially, we're estimating what bed space impact as far as admissions as well as prison beds are concerned. And so if there's any takeaway from this, look at the box. It's right on the front page. We know you guys are busy, and so these impacts can actually be several pages long, but if you want to know the down and dirty, look at the box. It will tell you what our estimate is. I will tell you, it's certainly by no means definitive. You obviously are the policymakers and you make that decision, but it's another piece of information for you to have in determining whether or not you support or you don't support a particular bill. But we will give you data as far as if you want to dig farther into this document, findings, different things about how many of these offenses are occurring every year. We have KBI data on occasion that we will put in. One of the other things too is you don't operate in a vacuum in your life. You shouldn't be operating in a vacuum when you consider these bills as well. And so we have a proportionality comparison at the end of the document that specifically puts the proposed bill in perspective of other severity of offenses. So if I introduce a bill for defective muffler and I want it to be a severity level 3, well, you can look at that and say, is defective muffler the same as kidnapping that we currently have? Probably not. And so in some instances, that serves as a way to at least look at things more broadly as to proportionality within the entire system. Prison population projections, I talked briefly about that. My main takeaway for you on this is that I am going to advise caution in your deliberations this year when it comes to looking at bills. The projections are not good. We bounce back from COVID, as you can see in this particular slide. We slid quite a ways. If anything was good about COVID, it decreased the prison population. But we have come back to almost pre-COVID levels, and the trajectory that we're looking at is not good. Even with the additional beds that are proposed by the Secretary at Hutch through the remodel replacement, We are looking at needing 1,000 more beds than that by the end of the 10-year projection period. That's another prison. So I ask that, that you be judicious when you look at some of these things, because otherwise we're looking at having to, the Secretary is going to have to be coming back to ask you to build once again. What is this based upon? The projections are based upon admissions as well as length of sentence. And so if you have increases in either of those, you're going to get higher numbers. Plus you have, if you have people that are staying longer in prison, that means that there's going to be a stacking effect, so people are going to need those beds year after year. So this particular slide just talks about if admissions are greater than releases, then you're going to continue to have increases. I'm going to just jump over this for the sake of time, but this gives you an idea of what we calculate or what we maintain as far as the data is concerned on these things. At the bottom of this is pretty much the projections that let you know the item in red or the cell in red is 2,667. That is the number I'm talking about in terms of an increase within the 10-year period. And this actually includes male and female population together. So, but I think that the Secretary had shown you some of our charts, I think, when he had an opportunity to present. But you can kind of get an idea of where we're going, where we've been with these charts, and that we're on a steady trajectory to actually increase and be at capacity. For those of you wondering that we are looking at, let me see if I can pull it up here. For the male population, somewhere in 2027 or 28, we'd be looking at capacity, and that gives you an idea of we have a 9,738 for capacity. And then for the females, that number is actually a little bit sooner, depending on things, perhaps 25 or 2026 that we may see that. Thankfully, we've seen the population on the females be going down lately. So at the end of the day, we actually take those projected numbers, what you see in these slides, and we actually test ourselves against what the actual population is. So what the right-hand column in this slide tells you is what that percent of error of what we said the projections were going to be and what the actual population was. And so, for example, last year's model, I require our staff to be within 2% of being spot on. And that's 2% on either side. What you can see here is on most months, and we track it by month, the model actually works very, very well. It's actually worked fantastically well, even through COVID. That allows us then to be able to be as close as possible. Why does that matter? Because it informs the Secretary as to whether or not he's going to need to make a request for prison or not. This just gives you a better idea, anyway, of where we are for this year in terms of projected versus actual. Thankfully, we're under what that projection is, and hopefully that will actually continue. We also do an annual report. I'll let you look through that, but if you have this electronically, I've linked this on the annual report right here, and then at the end of the section as well. To click on that, you can actually go, we have a dashboard now that we just started in the fall that allows you to actually pick out your jurisdiction. You can compare it to other jurisdictions or the entire state. It will give you top 5 offenses. It'll give you demographic breakdowns as far as race, gender, ethnicity, age distribution. It'll also tell you about prison sentence, revocations, all of that information that is specific to your jurisdiction. So we're really excited about that because it allows for, you can export the information, but it's public information that we want to get out to the public, and it makes it easier with these visualizations. Just a note About 60% of all felonies get probation. So just a point for you. That gives you a little bit more detail on this slide. Top 10 offenses for probation, non-drug sentences. You can see that they're varied. Some are, and you'll hear about person, non-person. Person crimes are normally designated as such so that if you're hurting somebody else, likely with a weapon, that type of thing, that's a person felony. If it's a non-person, theft would be non-person, for example. Criminal damage to property would be a non-person type felony. So that just kind of gives you a distinguishing thing of how that actually works. Ag assault, ag battery, some burglaries are persons. Drug offenses, as you might expect, 8 out of 10 of all convictions are possessions. The rest, of course, would be distribution, sale, or manufacture. There are DUIs that are felonies that we actually collect information on that, and that slide kind of gives you an idea as well. Johnson County always leads. That's actually one of their top 5 offenses. There's a lot of carryover from Missouri coming over to actually buffer those numbers. But as you can see, about half of all of the felonies occur in the big 4 counties, Wyandotte, Shawnee, Johnson, and Sedgwick. About 1 in 5 occur in Sedgwick County. The rural population is actually increasing as far as the felonies that are occurring there. This is another one, the link, please go to it. This is what it looks like. You can click to your heart's content on information that you want. We can actually help you with that if you get stuck, but we'd love to be able to do that. Senate Bill 123, as I talked about, this just gives you a little bit more information on what it is, what it does, how much we spend. We keep demographic information and other things just like we do on the research side for this program. For individuals completing the SB 123 program, they are 75% less likely to commit an offense. That's fantastic. The cost benefit on this program, we had a study done several years ago with the University of Cincinnati. For every dollar that is spent in this program, $4 is saved. So keeping individuals in the community, research shows, is way better than actually incarcerating them. If I'm spending $40,000 to have a spot at the Secretary's Airbnb versus spending $4,200, maybe an extra couple grand for community corrections costs as well, that's still a value if we can keep them in the community, keep them from being revoked, have them working, paying taxes, those type of things. So community-based treatment, which is what SB 123 does, allows them to get treatment, state-paid treatment, work, and be with their families and be productive. I'm going to kind of keep going through. This kind of gives you an idea of the diversion program. Recovery from Addiction Funded Treatment, or RAFT, is what the diversion program. This is an agreement between prosecutors that they actually put folks on diversion. It allows us to actually pay for that substance abuse treatment. You can see who the top counties at this point are actually from Wyandotte to Crawford. How much we spend per individual, and then what we're spending it on as far as residential treatment, what the diagnoses are. Most of these individuals are using meth. We have the opioids have actually over the years have now replaced marijuana as kind of number 2, but far and away, usually about 70% are meth users that are being treated. So it's been a pleasure to be able to talk with you. Again, please reach out to me. This is our Senate Bill 123 Program Director's contact information if you want more information about SB 123. But I would ask that you please reach out to us. You will be getting bed space impacts sooner than you think on these bills that you have. And if you do have questions about those, please do reach out. With that, I stand for questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much for your very thorough presentation. You covered a lot of subjects that fall within the Sentencing Commission purview jurisdiction, so appreciate that. So with that then, committee, are there any questions? Yes, Senator Shane.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Schultz, for your presentation today. Someone trained doing mathematical modeling, I appreciate the effort that goes in and know that all models are wrong, but some models are useful, so appreciate that you guys try to make those useful. So could you give me an idea for your accuracy targets for your team? How far out do you expect that accuracy target as far as how far out the projection is? Is it 1 month, 6 month, 1 year?
Yeah, great question. Our model actually is and you can see from that particular one, we go out 10 years as far as the model is concerned. The reality is we're actually doing this on an annual basis. So we can at least look back, see where we've been, but over time, we have about, over the entire time since we've actually, I think back to 95, since we've been tracking this, there's usually about a 1.5% increase in population every single year. Now, some years, of course, there's more, but very rarely does it actually decrease. And so we get together with, we have a consensus group that gets together. We are looking at data from the previous year during this time. We have assumptions that we actually make based upon that we put into the model, and then we're able to actually get these projections for the, this is usually during July in the summer when we're doing that for KDOC.
Okay. May I ask a follow-up, Madam Chair? Thank you. And just as a follow-up, for the increased projections on actual convictions for crimes, what's the data that informs that predicted increase? I think there was, 30% increase in drug-related crime, 30% in some other categories. Is that based off of national trend and data, or what are the data that inform that prediction?
We actually are looking at our own data, and that is the value of being able to collect all of the felony sentencing data in the state. So we are specifically utilizing our own data and the trends that would be affected as a result of that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Corson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question about the departure process, kind of a two-part question. One is, do you have a sense for both drug and non-drug offenses, the percentage of sentences that are within the appropriate box and the percentage then that would be departures either upward or downward from that box? And then can you just talk for our edification a little bit about what the departure process looks like, what kind of findings a judge has to make, sort of how that actually transpires in a real case? Thank you so much.
Sure, and it may be easier for other folks to be able to maybe discuss the departure process first and then talk about how it relates, if that's all right. I mentioned departures briefly. There are several kinds of departures that a court can actually make. So if I fall in one of these boxes and the prosecutor or defense attorney doesn't like it, they can actually file a motion for departure. The judge could actually, if they want to, although that's not done very often, but they could file a motion for departure. Now, you can file a motion upward departure or a downward departure. You can also file a dispositional departure, which means I'm in a prison box, but I want my client to be in probation. So I would file a motion for dispositional departure. The term of art is there has to be a substantial and compelling reason to actually depart. Now, the reality is a lot of times parties to get together during plea negotiations, which actually occur in over 90% of our cases. Otherwise, the courts would be clogged and we would have jury trials coming out our ears. But they actually agree to this particular box, but we agree to a downward departure for durational, for example. So if I have a 50-month sentence, I might agree as a prosecutor to 25 months instead. And if the court agrees to that with that, then that would actually be the sentence. In certain circumstances where it may be very egregious, cases where in recent past, individuals being convicted of homicide, you probably remember putting the individual put the victims in barrels on their property. Those type of things are outside the norm of a homicide, And because of that, the court can actually consider, and the jury ultimately considers whether or not that requires a enhanced penalty or a durational departure upward. So with that, in applying it to the guidelines, we track that information as to who gives departures, who doesn't, how many, and what we see actually on the drug grid versus the non-drug grid is it happens way more frequently in the drug setting. If you look at the drug grid, you can actually see there are penalties are quite high in terms of months. Usually severity level 1s and level 2s, in many cases, sometimes the average sentences are actually to the right of I. So for example, they're actually off the grid because there are less penalties. And that actually is, for the most part, that's actually the parties and the court and the process actually making that determination that these are the penalties that potentially would serve this particular case. Ordinarily, you would routinely think that probably somewhere in the middle of the grid in D or E categories, that would be what the averages are. And for the most part on the non-drug grid, they are. We do actually do conformity with the grid. This grid is actually, we are one of the 3 states that it's compulsory to use it. Other jurisdictions, it's discretionary. So it helps out a lot anyway that departures are available, but ordinarily you're going to be sticking to the grid as far as the sentences are concerned. So I hope that answers your question, Senator.
Thank you. That does. Do you have though like a sense of just kind of how often, like in what percentage of drug cases and what percentage of non-drug cases there is either an upward or downward departure from what would otherwise be the box? Do you have a sense of that in like percentage terms?
We could get you that information, but what I will tell you anecdotally is most of the departures that actually occur on the non-drug and the drug grids are downward departures. It's usually the parties agreeing to a mitigated sentence. Now there are in the statute, there are mitigating factors and aggravating factors. They're non-exclusive, but they just kind of give you a flavor for what the legislature has said would be mitigating or aggravating factors. But generally what we see is those departures are downward.
Thank you. Senator Reichman.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation, Secretary Schultz. This is my first time in the Senate in the Judiciary. I was in the House many, many years ago on the Judiciary, and that's when Governor Brownback was here. And one of the things they were talking about is having faith-based of the inmates and so on and so forth. You didn't mention that. Do you have is there anything that is faith-based in our prison systems here or not? Thank you.
That would be a question for the Secretary because we don't normally handle programming that actually occurs in the facility. I can tell you in the recent past, they have had, a prison fellowship, that type of thing, but that would be, I'm kind of out of my wheelhouse when it comes to something like that.
Thank you, and I thought that would be the answer. Thank you.
Yeah, we actually have, our Jermaine Wilson is actually one of our public members who's previously been mayor of Leavenworth, and he actually was an individual that got caught up in drugs when he was young, spent some time incarcerated, and actually is in a prison fellowship setting, and it actually helps inform the commission even more because we actually have an individual that has actually gone through the process.
Thank you. Senator Clays.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to follow up on Senator Shane's question about projections. I too find forecasting to be a rather interesting endeavor. And I'm just wondering what your model was. Is it simply that we have about a third of a percent of our population in prison, and then just taking that to the forecasts for a population, or do you have some more complicated matrix? And I'm not suggesting you should have a more complicated matrix, by the way. It's sometimes, Sir William of Ockham would say, the simple answer is probably the best one. So I'm just curious how you came about that, or if you have any more insight into what that model looks
Sure.
like.
And thank you for the question. I love the minutia that we're talking about. Part of the main thing for the projections, as I discussed before, is we're taking into account admissions and length of sentence. That's primary. Secondary elements that we're looking at, we actually look at what offenders are getting as far as jail credit when they're sitting in jail awaiting their time and day in court, program credit that they can actually get while incarcerated, as well as just the general good time credit. And so we take those into consideration as well, and that actually allows us to then be able to get even better predictors of following individuals from the time they actually come into the facility until they leave. And the model will actually take them from those time periods, and then it actually allows for an analysis to give us that particular 10-year projection. Like I said, it's been very good to us in terms of numbers, because we've been very close. Some years you're talking about a population of 10,000, and in some instances we're in single digits that we've actually. And that's for a male and female population is fantastic. Some months it's 0. We've actually predicted that. I don't want to hype it too much, because what'll happen after that. But the model over the years has been very good to us, and it's been a very good indicator of what's going to happen. And so we put a lot of faith in it going forward, which is why I'm bringing the red flag warning to you as far as where we're going with the population.
Thank you. I think that, fighting crime is an important issue across the state that we all hear about, and certainly the sentencing part of it is, part of the system of justice that we have. So I appreciate the information you have shared today. Appreciate the sentencing grid and the thorough explanation, and that it's literally probably on the bench of every court across the state, at least district court across our state. Very helpful, and would be helpful for committee also. Thank you also for the sentencing helpline that practitioners can call in. Is that open to anyone in the public if they have questions? Or?
It is, Madam Chair, and we mostly it's for individuals that are trying to figure out how the rules apply and those type of things, technical issues. But we do on occasion actually receive that from other folks as far as, we can't give legal advice certainly to them, but normally it's a practitioner type of request that folks can, and we push that fairly heavily in the webinars, educational webinars that we do.
Good, appreciate that service that you provide also. Finally, my question also is our specialty courts. Do you have any data on, now if you're in a specialty court situation, you're generally not going to be subject to this unless you don't graduate from our specialty courts, or could you explain how our specialty courts kind of are related to our sentencing guidelines?
Madam Chair, we are collecting data on all of those sentences. We do not keep track necessarily of whether they're actually in a specialty court, but I do know that individuals that actually are in specialty courts throughout the state do still take advantage of Senate Bill 123 treatment, for example. They are still, as long as they're eligible, then that allows for those jurisdictions to be able to take advantage of that treatment. But we actually are taking, we're not at a point where we have the data to be able to look at, here are the specialty courts. However, it wouldn't take too much to know that because there are certain, OJA has specialty courts in many of those jurisdictions, to be able to merge that with what's happening in that particular jurisdiction. So otherwise, we do have, if they've been convicted, we will have that felony sentencing data.
Okay, you will, and they've been sentenced, and you do collect that data as well. So,
yes.
Thank you. Committee, are there other questions? Senator Rose.
Thank you, Madam Chair. How long have you been predicting, modeling future prison rates? And can you show us, going back to the beginning, what was predicted and what the actual was?
We do have that information. We started, I believe, in 1995. It took a couple years to start gathering data and deciding what data needed to be collected. But we do have the data in terms of what those estimates were back at that time, and kind of give you an idea of, I think we're at like 1.8% in terms of estimate is concerned as far as error rate overall. Actually, that's probably the last 10 years. But we can actually get that information for you.
Thank you. It would be interesting to see a chart with that information. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And committee, if there are no further questions, we'll thank the executive director, Mr. Schultz. Appreciate, again, the thorough presentation and the data that you work on and the information you provide for our state, so as part of our system of justice. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Committee, just some business. We are not meeting tomorrow. The meeting was scheduled on call of the chair, and we're not calling a meeting for tomorrow. For our agenda next week, keep an eye out for a possible revised agenda from our committee assistant, Barbara Moore. We're working on getting bills processed and referred to committee, and so we might have some additional bill hearings next week. And we are planning for Friday of next week to be a meeting on the call of the chair, so be listening for floor announcements if we're going to call the meeting for next Friday. So far, it is a meeting on call of the chair and not planning on meeting next Friday, but keep an eye out for a revised agenda for the rest of the week and listen to floor announcements for a Friday meeting possibly, but not planning on it as of today. So thank you very much, and with that, our meeting is adjourned.